Here we are tonight with Mr. Ron Branstner in a special. Here we are tonight in a special session with Ron Branstner, a Christmas session. Merry Christmas to everybody who's watching tonight. Um, Neither of us, for a moment, believe that President Trump is going to lose this election. We are not doomers. We are not at all engaging in that kind of energy. And Joseph Biden, in his infinite wisdom, or shall we say the infinite wisdom of his unknown handlers, has said that the United States will rejoin the Paris Climate Accord because we really need the French telling us how to manage our economy. That is awesome insight because the EU is just full of goodness, right? So, what does it mean that Giuseppe Biden is going to re-engage America in the Paris Climate Accord? And what does this mean for America's energy independence? Because after all, President Trump has brought us very low gas prices. We're an ultimate exporter of energy. America's energy independent. We no longer are sending petrodollars in value to Middle Eastern potentates and sultanates and kings and grand poobahs of Islam. We're not funding terrorism anymore. What do you say about this, Ron? What's going on with Joe in his potato head?
Well, first off, Wes, I want to thank you for inviting me back on your show again. And so there's a lot to divulge here. I mean, a lot to get out because you put out a lot of big questions in this, and one of them is the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, I want you to think of it as a big sack of potatoes. The Paris Climate Agreement is every potato all has to do with the Paris Climate Agreement. So if I took out one of the potatoes and I stuck it on a table and I said, okay, this one is about social equity. I take the next potato and I stick it over here and I say, this is about green energy. And as I keep taking the potatoes out, the thing is the potatoes look like they're independent from each other, don't they? Mm-hmm. But the mere fact that the potatoes, I put them back in the bag, it all comes from the same bag of potatoes. It came from the Paris Climate Agreement. And we have to understand that everything that we talk about has an origin to it. And that origin all goes back to the global agreement that was made in 1992 in Rio. And that Rio is we call it the Paris Climate Agreement because that was in 2015. But since then, they've had several climate agreements. They've had the Rio de Janeiro, which was 1992. They've had Copenhagen. They've had several others. And then the Paris Climate Agreement was in 2015. 2015 was much different than the other two or three different climate agreements because they were called before then. They were called the millennial agreements. There was only 8 of them. There was 8 agreements. Well, when it came to 2015, they went from 8 to 15, and they extended out the SDGs, called Sustainable Development Goals.
Right.
And they stretched them out from 8 to 15. And so what they encompassed all these in the big sack of potatoes, they just added another 7, 8 different things on the menu. Mm-hmm. Now, why this is important to those who don't understand why the Paris Climate Agreement is so important to their daily lives, because most people think of this as, what's the Paris Climate Agreement have to be? That's over in Paris. That's not right here. It doesn't affect me. And that's what the common person thinks. It does not affect me. The fact is that it does affect you because you're part of one of those potatoes in that bag.
Can I share a local result of that? Because I really don't want to, I mean, to bring it home, there was a huge effort to shut down one of the major thoroughfares here in Rochester, which was part of the Green Steps program that was being enforced by Mayor Norton's government. And the Green Steps program said that Elton Hills Drive will be reduced from a 4-lane road to a 2-lane road, and there's going to be bicycle paths on it. Well, the local residents, who are mostly baby boomers and sort of rhino Republicans, suddenly realized this was affecting their lives. So they turned out in droves to the city council meeting and the county meetings, and they overturned it. And for the moment, they succeeded in stopping that road diet, they called it, and they've all gone back to sleep since then. But the Green Steps program is a constant march, right? These SDGs are constantly being rolled out in different ways. Speed limits, traffic, the bicycle lanes, they're coming back. And sorry, Ron, back to you. Green
No,
Steps
I
never
think
stopped.
that was an excellent segue because that's exactly what is right. When you're talking about the roads, we're talking about going to bicycle lanes, and that's just one of the potatoes in the bag. But
Yeah,
um,
just one
uh,
potato. Yeah.
the Green Steps program, I'm going to bring this home to you and the people that are watching this. People don't understand what the Green Steps program. There's about 16 other states that have these green energy movements. They all have different names to them. Wisconsin calls it Green Tier. It's a little bit different name, but it has the same effect as Green Steps program. Green Steps program is part of the Global Climate Agreement, and uh, they created this back in 2000. Well, it was in the early 2000s, and it is not. By the way, I just made an asterisk here. This is not a Democrat nor is it a Republican issue. The Republicans actually brought this to Minnesota back in
Mhm.
1993 under Arnie Carlson.
Right.
After Bill Clinton signed on to the Presidential Council of Sustainability from Rio de Janeiro in 1992, he brings it over, and the Mayor's Compact signs on to it, which is all the mayors of the United States had to be over 100,000 people. They sign on to this. Well, Arnie Carlson signed on to it in '93, and remember, he's a Republican.
Mhm.
He brings it full force into
Just like
Minnesota.
only Nixon could go to China, only Arnie Carlson could bring in this massive control of American society by an external power. It would take a Republican to convince people this is going to be a good conservative initiative, right? Politically,
No,
it works.
yeah, and Arnie Carlson, he's like one of these guys. He's inconspicuous, wouldn't think he would do anything malicious. And at that time, most people thought that this was some environmentally save the environmental policy. And after talking to many of these people later, they find out that, hey, this isn't what we signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to go ahead about 18 years, maybe a little bit less, 16. Arnie Carlson introduces it. Well, a lot of 501c3s in Minnesota, the Blandin Foundation, so on and so forth, they get on board and they start implementing all these social equity programs in Minnesota. Update it to 2008. Well, MPAC, Minnesota Pollution Air Control, and CERTS, which is a clean energy resource team, well, they start developing these programs out of the University of Minnesota, and they start introducing them as legislation to none other than Tim Pawlenty. And Tim Pawlenty then brings it on in 2012. Again, another Republican, right? Tim
Right.
Pawlenty introduces it from the Clean Energy Resource Team. CERTS introduces it. All the legislators, well, I should say all the legislators, many of the legislators signed on to it that this was a wonderful thing for Minnesota to clean the environment up, to bring our carbon emissions down to 2.0 and to clean up the energy levels and our streets, our highways, again, less traffic, shrink the roads down, go to bicycle lanes, less better walkways and pathways in the inner city, movie theaters underneath your apartment complexes, so you don't have to travel far to a movie theater. Have your mom and pop diner close by that you don't have to walk very far to. So basically, we would not be using much energy or resources, carbon footprint as we call it, and then we would localize it into a community that you never had to leave your community. It was one of these this kumbaya things. Well, they pushed
Science
it. So,
fiction movie.
oh, pretty. What that does sound that way, but and we can get it more into the weeds later about the environment. But that's basically what they were trying to do is to make it bicycle or pathway accessible to the local grocery store without having to use any carbon footprint. Live in a 1,000 square foot apartment, not a big apartment. Do not have and the
No.
idea behind this is to get rid of private property because private property is what they call unsustainable.
And they're
Remember,
actually admitting openly that, boy, in the future, you're not going to own anything and you're going to be happy because you won't own anything. Those statements are coming out by investors The billionaire class has actually got a plan for that. Also, who could be against something that's called clean energy or green steps? I mean, they really know how to use the language to package this stuff. You can't blame the Republicans really for falling for it. The packaging was so shiny and tinsel covered.
Well, they actually had a guy from the United Nations. I actually have that on my PowerPoint. He actually was quoted as saying, we have to keep these individual words separate from each other, even though they're all come from, he didn't say this, but it all comes from the same potato sack, but they're all individual. They all have their own different names. And it looks like they're working individually, but they're not. You know,
No.
you have 501c3s working individually, you have churches working individually, you have Clean Energy Resource Team, Impact. They're all working individually, but yet they're all working from the same platform, and that platform is called a comprehensive plan. Now, I want to go ahead.
So
I,
is that, does the comprehensive plan have something to do with the regional economic development boards and the control of that they have that's more powerful than our own elected officials?
well, yes and no. Yeah, the first part of that is yes. So I want you to think of a comprehensive plan that comes out of the United Nations, and then it's rewritten at every level of government. All comprehensive plans have the same language, sustainability. Now, if I look at hospitals, they have comprehensive plans. If I look at colleges, they have comprehensive plans. If I look at your cities, they write their own comprehensive plan. And then the government writes their own comprehensive. So everybody has a comprehensive plan, but it all works off the same nucleus of the United Nations Agenda 21. That's what we're dealing with. So even though a hospital may have a comprehensive plan, it still has to fall under the same 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, under the United Nations. Okay, so the SDGs, or I should say, the comprehensive plan, is actually written by college kids out of the University of Minnesota that follow a blueprint. That's another one. That's another word for the sustainability movement, comprehensive blueprint. They follow the same blueprint as the United Nations blueprint, and they just word it differently to customize it to your city or your county. Okay, so if you have a river running through it, they just customize the names and they just redesign the names for city councils. They use the same terminology. So the answer to your question is comprehensive plans. They are in every different level of government,
Mm.
and we have those. I looked at the comprehensive plan. I know in Rochester, I looked it up. It's
Mhm.
full of sustainability. You look up St. Cloud, Minnesota. It is a blueprint right out of the United Nations Agenda 21. And
Mhm.
every
Mhm.
one of these comprehensive plans are diametrically the same, written from the University of Minnesota. And the only problem is we're all following it like sheep because we don't understand that these programs are universally the same right out of the United Nations Agenda 21, and we follow these things, and that's where we follow into the COVID. We'll get into the COVID. It also, the Great Reset. It also follows into that same issue. So we are all being affected at every single level. I'm going to put it this way: from the moment you wake up to the moment you sleep, everything is affected by the Agenda 21 and the SDGs. From your air, your water, your roads, your highways, the pesticides in your grass, the ingredients in your shampoo, all of it has to do and follow the SDGs out of the United Nations about the amount of fluoride they put in water. Everything is controlled out of the United Nations.
That's amazing. And it's getting to be where even probably the information we are permitted to consume and have access to is part of that too. I suppose they are in control of the public schools. We know they bring initiatives there, they're in control of our social media, what is permissible thought and permissible speech. And, this seems like a really good moment to call an end to part one in terms of this conversation. And I think when you mentioned the next topic we'll be discussing, which will get into COVID, right? So
Well,
maybe end this segment with make a final case in the end of this segment, and then we'll come back for a part two and take it to the next.
okay. because I didn't want them to be hanging because there's an important message you left about the educational system. The educational system in Minnesota, because we're going to bring this home to the people, right?
Right.
Well, when we bring it home to Minnesota, we got to talk about. I told you about all the different comprehensive plans and the different levels. We need to focus on regional government. Minnesota has basically about 11 regions with nine basically visible regions. I'll get into that differently another time. But these regions have what they call regional governments. They're the fourth branch of government. Now you're saying, Ron, there's only three branches of government. That's true. But they have made their own fourth branch of government, which is what they call the non representative government. And
Mm-hmm.
these people are non elected people. And they're in your community. They run your community. They make
Correct.
initiatives. They make grants. They apply for grants. And here's the deal: none of these guys are elected, and they sit
Mm-hmm.
on these boards of Region 5, Region 4, and all these different regions. They sit on these regions and they dictate what goes on. So if you had an issue with, for example, your sump pump, you go to your county board and say, "Hey, I got a problem. Why are you regulating me?" And they said, "It's not us. It's the regional government." Well, wait a second. Who's that? You go to the regional government. They said, "Well, we introduced it, but we didn't pass it. It was the county that passed it." You go back to the county and say, "Yeah, we passed it on the idea that the regional government did it." So neither one of them takes the blame. So you have nobody to even go to when you have an issue, when they're taxing you on issues. So we when we talk, you had mentioned the educational system. That's really where I wanted to go. Inside of these regional governments, they also are the fourth branch of government. The state legislators gave authority to these regional governments to control your educational system. And I'll give you an example of this. Sourcewell out of Staples, Minnesota.
Yeah.
Now they are a part of the North uh, National Joint Powers Association. They were national, and they changed the name to Sourcewell and put it into a town of about 2,000 people, and they call themselves Sourcewell. Sourcewell is in the billions of dollars. They are funded. 97% of their money is funded by the federal, by the state government,
Mm-hmm.
and they control and they partnered up with the regional governments. Again, neither one of these two entities in Region 5 and Sourcewell are elected people. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, they're only about 2 blocks away from each other in Staples, Minnesota. They control everything. And they also are an arm to the educational system in Minnesota
Mm-hmm.
in that region. Now, another region, which is called WCI, West Central Initiative, they're the right arm to education in that particular region. So these regions are control. They can sit in your classroom and they can watch what you're being taught by the
Mm-hmm.
teachers, because they have to follow the curriculum that follows the United Nations Agenda 21 on the sustainability movement. So here you are, you've got a non-elected, non-representative group controlling your educational system and what's being taught in the school systems in Minnesota. And so I'm going to wrap this up in this segment. So here you are, you've got all these regions, and you say to yourself, but Ron, I thought we started off talking about Trump got out of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2050. Why do you keep bringing up Agenda 21? Well, the problem with that is Trump did get out of it.
Yes.
16 states refused to leave the Paris Climate Agreement, and Minnesota was one of them. And
Right.
under Dayton, he pushed the Paris Climate Agreement. He said, "I will not leave it." Waltz then replaces him. He's not going to leave it. And they stuck in there, and they are going full board on to the United Nations Agenda 21, fourth branch of government. We're taking your liberties, your personal private property away from you, your liberties of roads and highways, which you pay taxes for. They're taking all your liberties away from you, and you can't figure it out. You know why you can't figure it out? Because you don't understand what an SDG is. You don't understand the fourth branch of government, and you don't understand one thing: is these people have no representation over you, and you can stop them. The problem is I can't stop them on my own. I
Mm-hmm.
understand this. I know this. I try to
Mm-hmm.
get it out. But one guy talking to 5.4 million people is a little bit more difficult than sitting around the coffee shop and talking to 5 or 10 people at a time. We
Mm-hmm.
are being controlled by a fourth branch of government in Minnesota. And until you figure it out, And these state legislators, by the way, have given them the authority. And the
Yes.
problem is they gave the authority.
Mm-hmm.
These Republicans and these Democrats gave them the authority. So really, who's to blame? Shame on us for letting them give the authority. Because it's our responsibility. And you ask any single representative if they know anything about the Green Stuffs program, and they will, even the ones that voted for it, they say, I have no idea what that is. I would have never voted for it, but their name is all over it. I'll tell you what, SemGem. You know who
Yes.
SemGem is?
Yes, Senjum. Yes. Yeah.
He signed on it in 2012.
He's unaware of what it means. He's also sort of a closet Democrat who came over to the Republican Party to sort of take oxygen out of the room. But they like one official in the GOP of Olmsted County said to me, Senjum is one of the best Democrats we have. What can you do? There are Democrats on the GOP side. So they don't understand even the road diet. They don't understand. They're held, cookie cutter legislation is presented to them. And they just, I've talked to another representative who didn't even read his own bill, apparently, because I asked him specific questions about what was in his bill. He said, that's not in there. I said, oh, actually it is. It's on line 14A. I referenced the exact place, and he didn't know what I was talking about. And I read it to him. I said, did you author this, or who gave this to you? So in the next segment, let's get into that a little bit further, and let's touch again on the Blandin Foundation. Let's tie it all in with Paris and Green Steps and leftist language, and we'll bring it home in the next segment again. So this is the end of part 1, and we'll be back for part 2 in just a moment with Mr. Ron Branstner.